For 25 years, Jim Bishop has thrived in the corporate world. He's built teams, managed budgets, increased revenue, and facilitated over 20,000 hours of leadership programs. There came a point, though, where he started to become distant from his relationships and from himself. He felt stagnant, he felt burned out, and a lot of us have been there. There came a point where he started focusing on what truly matters and saw the breakthrough, and now he helps organizations do the same thing, focus on what truly matters. And today, Jim's going to talk to us about becoming a better human so that you can become a better leader. Let's go. Well, Jim, we appreciate it. Thanks for hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for being here.
Jason and I are excited for this one, and we'll dive in here in a second. But before we get started, do us a favor and just introduce yourself so folks know where you're coming from and your story, how you got to where you are today, and then we'll dive in.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Jim Bishop. I'm a founder and principal coach of Conjunction Leadership. We've been in existence since 2017 with an LLC in 2020 full-time in the marketplace. I ended up in this work by following the path of what came most natural, not because that's what I was trained in. So I went to school to be in genetics and physiology. So my background is actually in science. I have a master's in behavior and physiology. Worked initially in technical consulting, helping customers adopt our solutions. And most of the time we were talking to the customers, they weren't asking me any questions about employees. They were just asking me, or they weren't asking me any questions about the science. They were just asking me about the employees. Yeah. What to do, how to onboard, how to train, and just some basic HR type of questions. I started bringing my HR teams in as a value-added service and learning from them. And then pretty soon realizing I could probably network quite a bit with people and bring other people in. And that led me into a career in instructional design, instructional development, and training. Then I spent the bulk of my career working in science and in training and development, working in life sciences, primarily in pharmaceuticals, both animal health and human health pharmaceuticals. Spent a little bit of time in marketing to learn the business, but the bulk of my career in leadership development, training and development, instructional design. Eventually moved into career pathing, succession management, all things HR relative to that, and then into executive development. And it was kind of in those executive development days where I was scratching my head. We were putting classrooms together and putting people in those classrooms. And some of them would walk away with a breakthrough in mindset or skill set. And what would happen is they go back to bad structure or an inadequate supervisor. And a lot of the things that they had learned in the classroom would just fall short. And it was about 3 or 4 months, maybe 1 or 2 of them would come back and they'd say, now help me understand what I'm supposed to be doing with this. I realized in those moments, that's where we had the opportunity to move a lot more and to help them shift a little bit more. And they're not just in their way of showing up, but also in their mentality. And so that led me into researching and understanding more about what the coaching space looked like. So in 2016, I got my coaching certification. 2017 started accepting clients both internally and externally. And then you name it, throughout the next 2 or 3 years, coached internally with some pro bono clients on the outside, opened up an LLC thinking it was going to be a plan B someday. And then in 2020, when the world turned upside down and everybody was kind of questioning who are they and what do they want to do and how do we get along differently in society than we have now, I just realized in that moment, that was kind of the breakthrough moment that clients that I had on the outside were trusting me more and dropping into that space and making greater strides than the clients I had internally. So I realized my greatest gift was going to be external. I left my corporate job of 25 years and 5 kids and a wife thinking, what are you doing and what is happening? I decided to bring this gift to the world. So that brings us 3 years hence, and we still have a roof over our head and kids are still going to college and the business is still growing. So I've been very blessed in the last 3 years.
Well, I'm glad you had their support because I know you couldn't do it without those around you at home as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But Jim, that was perfect. And the one thing that stuck out to me was we hopped on, we prepared for this, and we were chatting a little bit, was helping leaders become better leaders, but
by being better humans. I think that was our biggest takeaway that Jason and I had. And so I want you to kind of kick us off with your definition of that and kind of what you think about when you think of that, when you help leaders become better leaders by being better humans.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the 2020 example and where that really got birthed in. I mean, I had been working in the space of leadership development for a long time, nearly 20 years at that point. Communication skills or handling conflict, even strategic planning or presentations, things like that were the skills that we had been working on. Mm-hmm. But when 2020 hit, right, what happened was the employee value proposition for what employees expected in the workplace completely changed. And it started bringing things to the surface, whether that be our work from home settings or putting a greater priority on our personal time, recognizing just burnout a lot more readily when we're staring at a camera for 24 hours a day, let alone all the social challenges that were going on in society at that time, whether it be the many injustices that were coming to the surface, the Me Too movement or the George Floyd movements, things like that were happening. And what I would see happening is CEOs in their seats were doing such a good job of making sure we didn't have layoffs and keeping the doors open and trying to make sure we re-innovated our business models. But what they weren't really doing was trying to drop into that space of being a better human, just understanding those human needs that we had for connection, human needs for productivity, but also human needs in terms of just being able to express some of our concerns or frustrations about where the world is headed in our workplaces. And I started projecting forward, and I looked and said, the younger generations that are coming into the workplace will be forever affected by this event. And even the youngest generations that were in the workplace at that point were already behaving differently, but there were still a predominance of Gen Xers or older that were there in the workplace kind of managing the old ways. And I could just see this day coming where this conflict was going to create greater drain on our organizational systems. And so it birthed in me this belief that if we're going to have a work environment that doesn't sap us of our lifeblood, work has sucked for a long time for a lot of people, and they've gone in every day armoring themselves up saying, hey, I'm going to do this and I can get smarter at this. But they come home drained and tired and frustrated because they're defending themselves all day long in the workplace. My belief is the workplace should restore us. It should be our practice zone. It should be the place where we find our best gift. If we approached our jobs as internships, right, and we just kept learning different things all along, we should be coming home at night more energized and more fulfilled and being able to serve our churches or our communities or our schools or our local governments. And we should be using our leadership that most of our companies are helping us develop and get paid for to go home and do things in our communities that make it better. That's my belief. But if we're going to do that, we have to start at the human level. We can't just start at the how to give a better presentation skill, because work and life are no longer separate issues. They run together so symbiotically that we don't just balance it. Now we have to integrate it. And I have to become a whole person in order to understand what part of my work makes me a better human and what part of being a better human makes me better at my work. And so for me, it's the whole person paradigm. And that's what I mean by being a better human. Are you better in the way that you relate to others? Are you better in the way that you manage a balance sheet? Are you better in the way that you manage your own checkbook or your physical health? And all of those things then go together to help you be a better human.
Love that. Absolutely love that.
Hey, Jim, kind of walk us through, if you could, if as a leader, everyone has the traditional way, right? They've got the trainings, the classes, and all that good stuff. So it's kind of stuck in their habits of that way. What would you say to someone who's trying to transition from that way of thinking to what you're speaking of as far as being a better human to be a better leader? How do they make that transition shift to make that connection?
Yeah. I mean, I'm never going to dismiss the notion that classroom or gathering type of events matter, because collectively there's a kind of a philosophy called collective effervescence, right? Like when we get together at a baseball game or a basketball game and the crowd cheers, everyone gets enthused about it. Or when we go to a concert and you feel that energy amongst everybody, you get hyped up too. When we come together in events, those are important for us because we can get hyped up. But professional speakers or whatever, they live on the fact of the hype. I live on the fact of, does it linger? Does it change anything when people go home? And so when people are putting classroom experiences together, I think they're very valuable, but they need to be supportive. And probably pre and post, they need to be supported by a mind shift, a mind breakthrough almost, because the body is not going to do what the brain doesn't want it to do, right? And we're not naturally hardwired to accept change. We're naturally trying to hold on to what was, even if what wasn't very good. Yeah. And so when we come to a training event, even in that event, you're going to have to spend the first 25 to 35, 45 minutes breaking what we're leaving to get to where we're going. I find that to be much more valuable in the coaching space, because in the coaching space, it is a lot about re-identification. If a leader, especially a leader who has been in a leadership role for 20 years or more, they've created some sense of brand identity around how they choose to lead. And in order to pivot and become a better human, not just a better business leader, they have to shake some of that identity. I mean, if I've held my identity in the fact that I can outwork, outlast, outplay most people, and now all of a sudden you're asking me to tap into my emotions, and I'm going to share personal stories about how I managed through 2020, that means I'm going to have to break the mindset that a leader never lets them see you sweat, right? Or never shares some vulnerability. And if I have a belief that says that, then I'm going to behave that way. But if I break that belief and says, a leader that shares with vulnerability develops greater connection, and greater connection means we move faster later, then they might be willing to risk forward and share some of their story. So my advice to anyone is, if executive coaching isn't something that you're managing today with your team, it needs to be provided, because it's there and only there that a leader can get comfortable reinventing who they are. If you want to get more of what you've already got, then just keep doing what you're doing. But if you want to get to somewhere else, I think there's never been a better time for coaching. So.
Well said. And I was just thinking back to what you said at the beginning about people being better at home and in their lives and managing their own selves better. And man, in a past life, I was in that toxic environment, so I can speak to it. I mean, and I've learned so much through that over the years, and I've learned that what happens at home and the stresses that we have at home do come into the workplace. So if we talk about attracting and retaining talent, I know it's a hot topic, but that should always be top of mind for any business leader. If they can be happy and be more productive at work, it's a win-win for everybody. So I love kind of taking this approach, and I think a lot of us have kind of come to realize that. But to your point, we're still kind of stuck doing what we're always doing and afraid of that change. So I appreciate you saying that, because I can relate to it. But Jim, walk us through kind of your process. I know you touched on it a little bit, but when you work with a leader, hopefully they're receptive, at least a little bit, to change. But what are those first kind of steps that you talk to them about? What are the things you're listening for, the challenges that they're going through, and kind of how do you move them into the next phase of their leadership path?
Yeah, that's great. I think it starts with, what is this person that we're talking to, right? And I have to go back to a little bit of a history lesson, but coaching hasn't really been around as a long profession for a very long time, at least in the professional sense. There have been people who've been good coaches, but in terms of certification and making it a profession, it's only 20, 25 years in the making. And as a result of that, I think a lot of executives particularly have the belief that if I have to use a coach, then I must be on a performance plan, or I must be on my way out. And yet at the same time, they have no problem recognizing that the guys that or the gals that are at the top of their physical game in terms of professional sports have nutrition coaches and strength coaches and all kinds of coaches around them. They recognize that. But when it comes to executive coaching, their automatic belief is, if I have to reach out for help, then I'm not doing very good. But the person that's usually reaching out for help isn't the person that says, gosh, I know that I really want to grow. I know that I've got all these areas of opportunity in front of me. The person that I find that often sends me a DM or finds me after a podcast or a workshop I've done, they'll be coming up to me going, I don't really know what's wrong. It seems like everything is going right. I've got what I've always wanted. I have the title, the cars, the house, the spouse, the prestige, the reputation, yet at the same time, I just feel like, what if this is all there is? What if I don't know where to grow anymore? Because at the top of the pyramid, it gets pretty narrow, right? And they're sitting there going, maybe there's one step above me or maybe two steps above me, but I don't know that that's what I want to do. And for them, growth is always equated with a bump in salary or a bump in title, and sometimes both. And if you're at the top of that, you don't really know what that looks like. And so they're coming to me going, gosh, I don't know what growth means. I know that I'm not where I want to be, and I don't know what I want to do. And I feel somewhat guilty admitting that to everybody, but is this all there is? And so it's not usually the person that comes to me that their life is in shambles or everything is in wreck. They just feel stuck, and they're not used to feeling that because they've been so equipped at controlling and organizing and planning everything. Mm-hmm. But when the world is changing so quickly, and after COVID and the business models changed and now social dynamics are changing, it's really hard for them to grasp how quickly do I need to keep up. And that's where I think that a lot of people are reacting when I find them there in this space of saying, I'm holding on because it feels like everything around me is destabilized. Now, that's the profile, right? So if you've got a leader who feels stuck and they're holding on, they're playing not to lose. And so what I try to do is just help them realize what is their reactive strategy. Like, how did they grow up and realize how to show up in the world? And we usually do it in one of three ways. We usually do it because we have greater relationship power than somebody. We do it because we have greater intellectual power than somebody else, or we do it because we just have a greater will than other people and we can outwork, outlast, outplay other people. And those things help us up to a certain point, and we've probably even developed some sort of brand identity around it. But if we overuse those things, like the person that has great relationship powers sometimes can take on the nice guy persona, right? And they subordinate to everyone around them, hoping no conflict happens. The person who's smarter than everybody else constantly is spinning out of control, trying to worry about how much they don't yet know. And they're hiding because they don't want anyone to know that they don't know everything. Then the person that is the over-controlled, over-planning, over-scheduling person is just burning themselves out day after day, realizing no matter how hard I work, the task list never gets done, right? And when they're in that reactive space, they're looking out their rearview mirror more than they're looking out their windshield. They're not trying to figure out what do I need to go create and what do I need to be in the world. So the first phase that we usually go through is a huge, what I call disruption phase. We have to kind of help these people unlearn what they've already learned for a long period. And that learning has influenced the way that they see the world. It's almost as if they have glasses on. And we take those glasses off and we help them kind of understand what belief do they hold on to. Like, if I am not productive, therefore I am what? And most people will fill in that blank with useless or not valuable, right? If I am in conflict, therefore I am what? And people will fill in that blank with not liked or not valuable or not loved, right? And so it helps them kind of see this yin and yang of how they've been able to see the world and then how their belief system has influenced all the ways that they've shown up. That's usually about a 3 to 5 month experience, depending on how hard those people have held that belief and those identities. And then we move into the second phase, which is really the bridging phase, where, okay, now the world is, the ground feels a little destabilized under me, but let's build a bridge. Where do you want to be? Like, how do you want to be seen? When it's all said and done, what do you want to be said and done, right? Or if something has to happen in a year from now to make you feel more on the offense versus the defense, what does that look like? And we'll start painting a vision of that for them. That gets them to the point where they say, okay, this disruption phase is worth it. Now we've got to spend probably the next 3 to 6 months in what I call the growth phase. And this is where the teeter-totter starts to tip. Like the first 3 to 5 months of it, I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm guiding them in this reflection journey and kind of pulling out of them their values and their high points in their life, what's crystallized them as a leader, maybe even some of the shadow behaviors that they're not quite certain that they want other people to see. But then in that the growth phase of it, the teeter-totter tips and they lead the conversation. That's when they're coming to me with some of the examples and the stories of what's going on in the work environment. And they're getting prepared for this conversation, or they're going to have to let this much of their workforce go, or whatever that is. And in those moments, what I can do then is I reflect who they said they wanted to be and make sure that the decisions that they are about ready to make are in agreement with their identity that they're trying to become. because the old self is going to resurrect itself very, very quickly. It's going to want to come back and control that situation, or it's going to want to hide from the conflict. It's going to want to do all those things. And my job is then to say, but this is what you said you wanted to be, and this is the behavior you're showing. And just let them decide, do they want to live in that tension? So that growth phase is really where they develop the muscle memory just to go out and, some people will say fake it till you make it, but it's really just practicing until the muscles are there for you to be able to stand on your own in this new identity. So
love that. And I was thinking back to when you said it gets narrow at the top, and it does. And I've heard in the past from consultants and folks like yourself that it's a very lonely place to be sometimes. And the imposter syndrome, that is a real thing. Like, I'm at the top, I'm supposed to have it all figured out. And what I've learned is that vulnerability can be a powerful thing. So I'm curious, from your perspective and the folks that you work with, how does being vulnerable to your team and showing your team that I don't have it all figured out, and it allows them to come forward and do the same to you as well. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. And I have to just also laugh a little bit here, because I love the fact that there are three dudes sitting here talking about this. Because if I find anything, I find it's my Y chromosome friends that have the hardest part with adopting that belief.
Okay.
Like the belief that vulnerability can actually be strength, right? Because for whatever reason, I think probably as little boys, and we've all had those experiences where we displayed vulnerability and it was taken advantage of. I think some leaders, particularly my male colleagues and the leaders that I tend to coach most, have this belief that if you ever let them see you sweat, someone's going to take you down.
Yeah.
And so in an environment where I'm supposed to know it all, but post-COVID, March of 2020, ain't nobody lived through that before, right? Nobody had written the playbook on that one before. No one knew the answers of it. And if a leader thought they did, everybody else called them out on that and knew that they were a big fake, right? So at some point, this vulnerability bubble has to get bursted, because they have to believe, like, the only way that we're going to get better in work, but also in society, is when we draw upon the collective strengths of everybody around us. And the only way I can do that is when I say, Thomas, you're much smarter than I am. Jason, you've done this much longer than I have. Let's bring you into the fold and figure this out. Like, I may not be the smartest person. I may not know all the answers, but I do know how to draw a team together. And let's do that. And when you do that, we can be better than the sum of our parts. But if you don't do that, and you still think I have to have all the answers, then I will never let Thomas be better than me. And I'll never let Jason be smarter than me. And I'll never let somebody else have more power than me, because that's what my identity fears the most. Right? So
well said. Yeah, it's a real thing.
Jim, I want to look at the other side of the fence, right? I want to look at the people that are being led. So to your point, and to Thomas' point as well, you're the leader at the top of the mountain, right? Reach the top, do everything. They got it all figured out. And then the people they're leading see this transition, this shift, this change from someone that's different than what they're used to. How do you navigate that? What does that look like when you're leading this group of this team, and they see this mental and shift from their leader that's a little different than what they're used to?
Yeah, well, as with coaching, I like to answer questions with questions. But so I would just pose the question back: what if they don't see the shift? Right? What if a leader holds on to the identity that they've had for so long? What they risk losing is the loss of their followers. And by definition, then they're no longer a leader. They may be in title, they may have to lead out of positional power, but they'll no longer lead out of influence, right? So here's how those people react to it: is if it's done in a authentic way, right? This is where I say belief has to lead behavior. Because I can manipulate my behaviors, and I can seem very vulnerable by asking Jason all kinds of probing questions, and I can seem like I want to get to know who you are. But if I don't respond to that authentically, and all I do is then immediately transition to let's get down to business, and I need you to do this and this and this and this, then you're thinking, then why did you even ask me those questions? It wasn't authentic, right? So where I really spend a lot of time with leaders is the belief has to be there first. You have to agree that vulnerability, as in this example, is a needed trait in leadership. And if you don't agree with that, you might display vulnerability, but it will come across to everybody below you as if you are completely naked. Like they're looking at all the things you don't want them to see, but you're hoping that you did all the right things, right? And so I always ask the leader, well, what happens if you don't pivot? Because if you don't, you run the biggest risk of them all in losing your following. If you do pivot, you're going where society is going. Like, I can paint this picture for you that the definition of leadership has fundamentally changed over time. We are no longer in the Jack Welch era where you control and plan and strategize your way out of everything, where you fire the bottom 10% and you promote the top 10% and hope the rest of them figure it out. Like, those were the rules. Those are no longer the rules of leadership anymore. Like, how do you manage a complex remote work environment where people don't interrelate at the office water cooler anymore? How do you bring in social topics of Middle East unrest and know that you've got divergent viewpoints going on there, and you've got to help everyone get along and feel like they fit in this place rather than forming factions, right? How do you get through racial divides and conquer boardroom conversations when well-meaning board members want you to do one thing, but it's not right for your business right now? Like, they have all of these complexities, and if they don't pivot, they're not keeping up with the rest of the time. So I guess that's how I would answer the question, Jason. People are going to notice. What do you want them to notice is the question.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hey, Jim, if I'm listening to this and I've got a responsibility to my organization to put a culture together and create the team, lead the team, but I'm hearing some of the things you're saying, and I'm like, well, we could probably do a little bit better in some of these areas. Where do we start? I guess give us like 1 to 3 tips on how we can kickstart this in the right direction and move forward.
Yeah. Well, one, if you've already gotten to that point, great. You know you need to do something, right? So give yourself a pat on the back, because you're above 90% of the people, right? Number 2, if you're at that point and you need to do something, here's what you don't do. You don't start with the brass plaque that you're going to hang by the wall that has your mission, vision, and values on it, right? Because I can tell you what's going to happen is you're going to gather your generals around the table and you're going to argue for days about what is the best word to describe something. And what you end up with is the most neutralized, bland language possible so that no one gets offended when they see that. And it will say something like honesty, integrity, and truth, because that's what everybody puts on their values, right? Yep. And then every day people walk in and out and they see that brass plaque and they do nothing about it because it doesn't mean anything to them. So do not start with the brass plaque.
Good point.
Then what do? You start a leader goes first, right? A leader has to go first in this journey, because culture, Seth Godin defines it this way: culture is people like us doing things like this, right? And I agree with that definition. So if people like us do things like this, you already have a culture. But if you want people to do something differently, you can't just go out and tell them what to do, because leadership isn't necessarily taught, it's more caught. So you have to go do it. You have to go be it. You have to go show it. And then you gather other people behind you that want to follow this journey, and eventually culture pops out. So for 25 years, I put butts in seats in training programs, and I saw maybe 10% results on that effort. But when I put one leader in the hot seat and we go courageous around who are they and what do they want to do and how do they want to show up differently, I see innumerable results, because then we go from the leader to their team. We do team coaching, team sessions, team indoctrination, whatever you want to call it. But what happens is the language becomes synonymous between the leader and their team. And when they have common language, it's like they move to a foreign country together and they can just find the bathroom together easier, right? It just goes better. Once they do that, then we go to the brass plaque, because we already know what the words are, because we're already seeing them in action, and they come very easily. And you spend 5 minutes putting them up there and going, this is who we are, right? So this is the most efficient way that I know how to do it. It doesn't seem that way when you're probably in org development, because in org development, we look at how much budget do we have and how do we spend it most wisely across the broadest people. And in org development, we're going to say we've got this much money, a classroom experience spread across 30 or 50 people. That's going to be a better spend than going double down with one leader. But I can tell you that one leader who chooses to change can change the entire trajectory of their team and their culture way faster than putting 150 people in a classroom, because that one leader is going to model the behavior that you want everyone else to see. So when I work with organizations, we pluck off that one leader, and then we work with their team, and then we pluck off another leader and we work with their team. And then pretty soon what we're doing is igniting all these tiny grass fires that ignite what their culture needs to be. So
beautiful. Jim, this has been awesome. I love this kind of stuff. And leadership is important, but I also think to multiple of your points, being human is even more important, and leading with vulnerability and compassion and authenticity, all the things that you've described. So I can't thank you enough for hopping on here and giving us some great content.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
We'll have to do it again
Thanks,
soon.
Jim.
Jim, we cannot thank you enough. That was fantastic. Every leadership episode that we do, the big takeaway is always vulnerability and authenticity and transparency with your people, allowing them to do the same with you. So I appreciated a lot of what you said. And for the listeners out there, I'm going to put Jim's contact information below for you. Feel free to follow him, connect with Jim, get to know him, and see what else he's up to. I know he's got a lot of great insights for all of us. So have a great Thanksgiving this week. We'll see you next time.